All right. Well then, welcome back to the Contrarians. Today we're doing a Patreon voted on panel, and let me tell you guys, if you like bands named after the lead singer's genitals, then you were in the right place because we are doing our top 5 Whitesnake albums. Spoiler alert in case you had never figured that out. So we're just gonna go around the horn here. I just can't stop with the dick puns now. We're gonna go around the horn 5 times, and we're gonna do two, two, and one in any order the panelists choose. So, Mr. Pete Jones, always good to see you. Why don't you start us off?
Well, thank you. It's nice to see everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. We're going to jump right into it. My number 5 is 1979. And we have a representation already over there with David. And it's Love Hunter. Mine is a little less censored than his T-shirt is. You can say whatever you want about the cover. It certainly catches your attention, and that was the purpose. And now that we're old enough and don't have to snicker through, it's what it is. Cool. I love this cover. I love the logo. This is a great album. There's a lot of great material on here. The last one to feature drummer Dave Doyle. And some real strong tracks on here. Some of my all-time favorites: Walking in the Shadow of the Blues, Medicine Man, Love Hunter, the title track. It's very well recorded. The sonics on it are strong. It's a very heavy blues based, as this era was. And it's an album that I just really appreciate. And actually, the songs are so great that if Ian Paice had been on this one, it might even be higher on my list. Dave's not a bad drummer by any means, but you know how I feel about Ian Paice. But this is a really great record, and one that's pretty early on in their career here, and they're going from strength to strength, as my chronological order of picks will say. So that's my number 5. Number 4, and I'm going to have a visual aid, and I don't usually have visual aids other than my little printouts of album covers because I'm not a physical media guy. So you'll have to humble me for a second. I just got this back from the print shop. A lot of glare on there, but there's Bernie and Mickey Moody and Murray and Mr. Pace and Mr. Coverdale. And that's a very rare and very old poster, which I've had for a very long time. And I needed to get it out of the roll, so they put it on board for me. So we're going to 1980, and we're going to the album Ready and Willing. And that album cover is not very exciting. It's kind of boring and dull and doesn't get your attention much other than the logo right there. But I was already a fan, so it didn't matter. Some of their all-time staples on here: Fool for Your Lovin'. Okay, I'll get hate mail. Accept No Substitutes, folks. This is the original. This is the one that I really attached to. Sweet Talker, Ready and Willin'. Carry Your Load, Blind Man. It's a great side. Ain't Gonna Cry No More. Just really strong material. Again, really great recording. These albums sound really good. All the instrumentation is clean. They've got a lot of low end on it. David's vocals sound outstanding. His voice is in great form. And of course, we now have Ian on drums, which really just takes this up to a next level. He's a fierce partner with Neil Murray. The two of them are one of the best rhythm sections in rock, in my opinion. So, but those would be my first 2, Love Hunter and Ready and Willing.
Okay, off to a strong classical start. All right, David Alpizar. David, I'm going to guess what one of your favorite albums is, but we'll see if see if anyone has a hint as to what one of his favorite albums might be.
We'll see. It's tough. I think that, having done this for a while, I think it's a double-edged sword when you get to talk about a band that you really like. Because on one hand, you're passionate about the topic. On the other hand, it's really difficult to narrow that catalog down to 5, because I think their catalog end to end strong. So as I do this, it's one of those where, you ask me next week and some of this could shuffle around. But as of today, number 5, I'm going to go sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, and I'm going to go to the Doug Aldrich era and pick Forevermore. I think this is a really, really good record. I think that, I like both of the studio albums that they did with, and sort of that Doug Aldrich, Reb Beach era. I thought this one, track by track edges the other one out just a little bit. This came out in 2011. I think it's, like I said, overall really, really strong Whitesnake record. I think that, by the time you get here, you start to see a little bit of the crack in Dave's voice, but I think he still does a really good job. I think the songs are strong. I love what Doug Aldrich brings to Whitesnake. I think he fits the Whitesnake DNA really, really well. Steal Your Heart Away, Love Will Set You Free, One of These Days, and certainly are some of my favorites. And I think the title track that finishes out the record is just Whitesnake DNA, epic Whitesnake through and through. So yeah, if you haven't checked that out, the more recent, over a decade now, but if you haven't, checked out that release, I would recommend it. Coming in at number 4, I'm going to go sort of the other end of the spectrum a little bit and I'm going to throw my record around. Come and Get It. So I like this record a lot. I think that when you get to this era for me, and you start seeing what I'm going to talk about in my second position. It could really interchangeable. I think this record and the one that sort of precedes it are both really, really strong end to end. So on any given day, we can switch back and forth. But again, clocks in at about 40 minutes, 1981 release. So they're kind of stepping out of the early, really, really blues based, and you start to see the transition that will become slided in, a few albums later. I think this is really, Ian Pace is in the band by now, so we've got sort of this classic UK lineup, as I like to kind of refer to it. Martin, our fearless leader, Mr. Pop-Up, I think refers to this record as their Bon Jovi record. And hearing that in my head as I go back and I can see that, I think it's a little more polished maybe than its predecessor, and certainly from Love Hunter. There's even a talk box, I think, in the song Hit and Run. So, there's another Bon Jovi connection. But I think the material is strong. Don't Break My Heart Again is probably a hit in any era. That song, you put that on any record. I think 87, Slide It In, I don't care where you slick that. So that song's a hit in any era. I could see it on MTV with Sarzo licking his bass, with that 80s production. But that song is phenomenal. I think Child of Babylon, Lonely Days, Lonely Nights, and Hot Stuff are some of my favorites. So coming in at number 4, Come and Get It.
Cool.
Good stuff.
Fantastic. All right. Well, maybe Slippery When Wet was Bon Jovi's Come and Get It. Maybe Martin's got it the wrong way around. Okay. Good picks. Let's move on to Whitesnake superfan, Mr. Peter Kerr. Peter, tell us about number 5 and 4.
Yeah, look, I'm going to go to a little bit more of the modern era, and I'm going to put Good to Be Bad, but I might cheat. I might put Still Good to Be Bad, which was the reboot, remastered, re-energized album of 2008. I really like this combination, this band. I think Reb Beach and Doug Aldrich were a good dual guitar combo for Whitesnake, and I think DC's partnership with Doug Aldrich was really, really good. I think arguably Doug Aldrich is probably the best guitarist that Whitesnake had since Bernie Marsden or Mick Moody. I like the songwriting on this album. It's got some really strong songs. Best Years, even though it sort of cribs the Allman Brothers, is a great opening track. Lay Down Your Love, Summer Rain. I think that DC's voice has got that fragility. He is starting to be a little bit more husky, and but I appreciate that. I like that sort of Rod Stewart, Bonnie Tyler type of huskiness, and I think he really uses it well on the material. Look, by this time, 2008, when this album first came out, Whitesnake weren't quite the draw card of the glitter years of 1987. So although they were a draw card in Europe and the UK and selling out halls in America, they were sort of more of a upper tier club act. But it's a bit of a shame because this album deserved to be seen in the stadiums. Now, what I like about this album, it sort of puts its feet in two camps. You've got the sort of electricity, the pyrotechnics of 1987, but it does pay homage to the years of Bernie Marsden and Mick Moody, the glory years, except no substitute, as Pete Jones would say. So I like this album, still good to be bad. And a quick sort of shout out to the bottom end, Uriah Duffy and Chris Frazier on drums. Chris was only in the band for one album. There's a lot of click and there's a lot of groove. And I had an interview with Doug Ulrich, and he pointed out that he really loved playing with Uriah and Chris Fraser, but it wasn't meant to be. It was only one album, that lineup, and done. All right, so we go to the big, probably the controversial album that probably won them lots of fans, but it was a lot of the traditional fans that went ta-ta, and it's Whitesnake 1987. So what more can I say? This is the, I think it's almost, as Tim Derling would say, this is almost the diamond certification. It must be by now. Anyway, this is a huge hit. You know what all the songs are. It's got Still of the Night, Bad Boys, Here I Go Again, Is This Love? You couldn't avoid listening to any of these tracks. They were played in radio. Now, listening to it with 24 ears, there's a lot to forgive. There's a little bit of filler. There's gated drums. But if you know the backstory and how David Coverdale was on the skins of his ass, basically, and he had $1 in his pocket, and he went through so much in the recording of this album, basically lost his band. Sykes was knifing him in the back. There was a lot of things happening. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments on that Sykes thing. Anyway, I'll keep going. But, it is what it is. He had vision against all adversity to put this album out, and it became a huge success. Now, the thing that I want to point out about this 1987 album is that David's voice is different. He had a sinus operation, and I don't think the rich, bluesy, lower tone of his voice was ever the same. He went into a higher register. It was a la Robert Plant, and it probably suited the highly charged metal dual guitar sound, or that really amped up guitar sound of this album. And the rest is history. So personally, with DC's voice, I love the bluesy, the Paul Rodgers, the real, deeper voice. But look, it's part of history. I can't deny it. The songs are great. And for the majority of the album, I think it, deserves to be in my top 5. So there it is, 1987. That's my number 4. Look, it's a controversial album, but you can't deny it. It was a game changer.
Okay. Hey, Dave loves the blues. It tells his stories. All right. Thank you for that, Peter. Now let's go up to Mr. Darlene. Tim, tell us what your number 5 and number 4 are, please.
I'm really glad to see the latter-day albums being mentioned, because a lot of the times, those albums come out, they're on smaller labels, and they just don't have a chance to get into that sort of Hall of Fame status. But I listened to all of the albums before doing this, and I think we'd all agree this is really hard because it's a pretty consistent catalog. Much of your enjoyment depends on when you came on board. So having said all of that, I'm may probably be the first person, or maybe the only person to mention this, but I can't poke too many holes in Flesh and Blood, which is so far the most recent Whitesnake studio album from 2019. Obviously, Coverdale's voice is much the worse for wear. I saw him live the year previous to that in 2018, and he was struggling, but he still managed to put together a really good album in the studio with always great musicians. My sort of complaints about latter-day Whitesnake is that he sort of like cuts and pastes old lyrics into new songs, but he's not the only lyricist to do that. But there's some catchy songs on here, like the title song, Flesh and Blood, Heart of Stone, I really like. There's some really nice melodic songs on here, like some of the quieter ones, like After All. It's an enjoyable album that I think anybody that got on board with Slide It In or 1987 would find enjoyable. Sadly, Frontiers Records, they just don't get the distribution that they should get. But I stand behind that. Number 5 is Flesh and Blood. My number 4 is the same as Peter's. This is where I got on board. I had never heard of Whitesnake prior to this album coming out because I was born in 1974. Whitesnake were kind of a non-entity in North America. I very quickly realized this wasn't a brand new band and this wasn't their first album, even though it was self-titled. Now, this album, years past probably would have been higher on my list, but I think that there are some songs on here like Straight for the Heart, like even Give Me All Your Love, even songs that I would tell you that I like. Maybe they're a little bit dated, but I love the remake of Crying in the Rain. I think it is so mighty. Bad Boys, he opens many a show with that, and I can see why. John Sykes is on fire. Children of the Night, maybe a little similar, maybe a little too similar to that song. They both kind of start out the same with, Peter and I talk a little the John Sykes wind up, but it's kind of cool when it happens. Still the Night's an evergreen. I think it's an amazing song. That was obviously the song, and I should have to say the video that got on my radar. I was like, oh, okay. Now Here I Go Again. What I like about the fact that with Here I Go Again is if you go and listen to the original version on Saints and Sinners, and you can enjoy the song without the fatigue of having heard it so many times. But hey, it got them a well-deserved hit all around the world. I like Looking for Love and You're Gonna Break My Heart Again too. So I think those, I don't know why they didn't put those songs on this album as well. I mean, not many 9-song albums came out in 1987, but I still think it's a strong album. And I just checked, and the last time it was certified was way back in 1995. It was certified at 8 times platinum. So I have to think if it was recertified, it could be a diamond record. Universal needs to get on that. So that's my number 5 and 4.
Okay, Tim, thank you. I know getting certified costs money, and probably Universal just doesn't think it's worth the investment.
I think Universal owes all of their artists that favor after lying to them about the fire. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, we could do a whole show on that. All right, my turn. So I have chosen to put out my picks in chronological order, and I am starting with 1980s Ready and Willin'. And I've got to be Martin Popoff for a second and complain about the stupid title of this song. If you're going to drop a letter, you drop the G in willing and make it Willin'. Nobody drops the D from and. What is that? Ready and willing with the G on. It makes no sense, even in like English pronunciation. So anyway, it's a dumb title. That's all I'm saying. But it's an album that's got a lot of really great songs. I think this is the album where the band really gels. To me, all of the albums before this are they're still working towards the sound that is going to make them a complete band. And it's probably the addition of Ian Paice that finally brings that on home. But for all of that, I have to say, I don't really hear Ian that strongly in the Whitesnake material. I don't think that was something that during his journeyman years, when he was in Whitesnake and playing with Gary Moore and whatever else he was doing, I just don't think he brought his personality out the same way he did when playing with Deep Purple. But clearly, having John Lord and Ian Paice in the band was very comfortable for David Coverdale. So this album is primarily guitars and singing, which that is going to follow Whitesnake for their whole career. You get the wonderful combination of Moody and Marsden, along with, again, very memorable songs. I don't know why, but I'm always kind of surprised when I look at the songwriting credits and see that Moody has so many songwriting credits, because Marsden gets all the love for being Dave's co-writer. But Moody wrote at least as many songs, and I think actually more than Bernie did, but Bernie's were the ones that became the hits. Also, my one strike against this is I find the production extremely polite. even though it's Martin Birch, and Martin Birch became, the heavy metal producer of the early 80s, he's not there on this album. This album is recorded, again, polite. All the frequencies there, the instruments sound good, but there's no edge to it. It's really a rock album, not a hard rock album. And then Peter Kerr and I were talking about this before. For some reason, the Contrarians have always stayed away from live albums, but damn it, Live in the in the Heart of the City, which is from the Ready and Willing tour, is one of my top 5 albums. I think Whitesnake always excelled live. It's a beautiful sounding album. I love the backing vocals. It's not just David. Marsden and Moody are also singing. They sound great. Again, you don't get a lot of personality from Ian Pace and John Lord. At least on Ready and Willing, there are 2 songs where you can really hear John Lord's organ sound. But nothing really sticks out. But you get a lot of slide guitar from Mick Moody. David Coverdale loved that. He always gave him feature spots. I think it's one of the things that kind of pegged them as a 70s band, though, because, slide guitar, that was Southern rock. That wasn't going to be the type of thing that you carried into the next decade. And you can really hear the differences in style between Marsden and Moody. Marsden is much more fluid. He's much more in the pocket. Moody, when he's not playing slide, he's a very twitchy guitarist. He's very frantic in his playing. So it's a great contrast in styles. And David Coverdale, I will say he sounds amazing on this album, but again, I think he's very controlled. He's hanging back a little bit. I like my live performances for the singer to be kind of on the edge, not just with, not the edge of his range, but to sound like they're really invested in the material. And I mean, it sounds like David's enjoying himself, but it doesn't sound like he's really hooked into it. He's just up there enjoying the crowds and the experience. Also, I know there are a lot of versions of this. It's come out with bits and pieces of their 78 album, Live at the Hammersmith, and other things. The one I've got is from the boxed set Little Box of Snakes. Little Box of Snakes, which if you don't own old Whitesnake, you can get it all in this box set for, I think I picked this up for $30. And it'll be, if you're a hard rock fan, that's $30 well spent. All right, Peter Jones, let's move on to your number 3 and 2.
Very good. All great picks so far. Number 3, mine just happened to be in chronological order so far as well. And I'm going with 1981 and the previously mentioned Come and Get It. And in contrast to Ready and Willing, that's a really cool album cover. That's probably the best of the lot, in my opinion, so far. That really gets your attention, and for maybe more honorable reasons. So we'll leave it at that. But it's a great, great cover. And this is where they've had the album to kind of unify and gel. And to me, this is where they're really kind of hitting a peak. The title track, Come and Get It, Hot Stuff, is exceptional. I'm going to not say Reed is incorrect because he hears what he hears, but I come from a drummer's world. And I think that there's all kinds of Ian Pace all over this that are shades of earlier Purple. His fills and Hot Stuff. Love Is Plain in Lonely Days, Lonely Nights. Don't Break My Heart Again is a classic track. Great feel, exceptionally melodic, but it's got an edge to it. One of my hidden favorites on here is Child of Babylon. I think that's just a really, really great record. And again, you can say safe, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But that's kind of where Martin was at this period. I mean, even Heaven and Hell is a bit tame until he gets to Mob Rules, and in my opinion, kind of opens the gates a bit. And with Bloister Cult and things he does after that, Martin kind of, takes the restraints off and lets it be a little more open and live for the decade. It still has a more Deep Purple style feel to it. They're better sounding than Purple's earlier studio records. I don't think that is as a shock to anybody, at least from my opinion. Machine Head, and those are very dry. This is a much more alive. All the instrumentation is there. Again, the secret weapon here might be Neil Murray. Just such an underrated player. So musical, busy, but he's a busy without being intrusive. And that is a very subtle but very strong skill for a bass player. And all the very best bass players in rock history have had that attribute, to be able to still play busy but not be in the way. And especially with more pop and more melodic songs, this is where they were going. So come and get it. I'm also going to follow Reed here, and I'm going at my number 2, Live in the Heart of the City. I absolutely adore this record. This is one of my what I call lesson albums. I may be a little bit different than some other Whitesnake listeners. I had a record shop outside of Chicago that had a very lucrative import connections. I got these way before everybody else did. And so I was a big fan of these before most people had any idea that Whitesnake even had stuff out. And that was a great, discovery that I could get these. And when I got this one specifically, wow, this is just power all the way across the line. Ian Pace has so many signature fills that I've stolen and put into my drummer's toolbox that I've pulled out more than a few times over my career because they're just so tasty. His speedy single-handed rolls coming out of the end of the solo section and walking in the shadow of the blues, great hi-hat choking. To me, the real Ian Pace signature stuff is just listen to him on Take Me With You. This is Ian Pace, a.k.a. Speedy, if you're familiar with the Green Bullfrog sessions. If you're not, go check that out. But that was one of his nicknames, and aptly, because this is just a full-throttle, propulsive, and this is something that Ian Pace was the best at. And it's just got so much energy. Coverdale sounds great. The guitar work is exceptional, and not to be a broken record, Murray is way up in the mix. And listen to his bass playing on Fool for Your Lovin'. Oh my gosh, it's a clinic. And it's just so much fun to listen to. And Lord sounds great. Lord is restrained in this band. This is nowhere near what he contributed to Purple. First of all, they've already got a second guitarist. So that role that he played as a, quote, rhythm keyboard player in Deep Purple isn't needed here. So he's kind of a color, kind of dances and moves in and out. But I do think his presence had to be a very strong stability factor and a comfort factor. And, the trio of the old DP people had to be something that was good. But there was trouble brewing ahead for at least my friend, Mr. Pace, but we'll get there in a minute. So those are my next 2, Come and Get It and Live in the Heart of the City.
Okay, very good. Actually, I really enjoy all of the Whitesnake live albums, but Live in the Heart of the City is exceptional. All right, David, give us your number 3 and 2, please.
Okay, well, this album's been talked about a couple of times. Whitesnake's 87 album comes in at number 3 for me. Like Tim had mentioned, timeline kind of is everything with this stuff. And, being 15 in 1987, a little south of Tim in the United States, Whitesnake, I didn't have a really good import store next to me. So Whitesnake was sort of invisible other than this, I think, position. I was consuming music like a lot of people my age through MTV and the rock radio and maybe some magazines, but that was it. And I think Whitesnake was really positioned, as a new band. You could stand, and try to stand Coverdale up next to John Bon Jovi and Joe Elliott as contemporaries and pretend that he's not, a decade older, right? And, so it was later, after the success of this record, that used cassettes and and then eventually the previous discography was released on CD, and we could sort of get into those records slowly, for the rest of us. But this is my entry point. I think that it has that Mike Stone, Keith Olsen production. It's very 80s, but it maybe because it's my entry point and I have a sort of a nostalgia to it, it doesn't age as bad as other stuff of the era does for me. I think it holds up. I think Still the Night, epic, and it doesn't tire. I think Still the Night is, as it was mentioned, is evergreen, really. And going back, it falls at number 3, and I think someone else mentioned, maybe Tim, that there was a point in time when this probably would have been number 1 for me, perhaps. But I think going back and revisiting over time, and there is some filler or some stuff that probably is not as good as the rest of it. I do agree that the songs that were sort of left off and on the European version, Looking for Love and You're Gonna Break My Heart Again, are probably better than some of the latter half of the songs that were on there. I think they could have been either added or replaced, maybe a couple, and would make a strong album even stronger, perhaps. Looking for Love is tough because I think it's maybe too similar to some of the stuff that's on there, but I think it's a great song. I love to listen to it today. It's on the box set, so folks that haven't heard those can get that box set that came out a few years ago, and all that stuff is on there. But I think it also appeared, those tracks appeared on the European versions of the '87 records. So kind of falls in at number 3 for me. It was the first one I got on CD and was really able to crank up. And I think this version of Crying in the Rain is phenomenal. We'll talk about how I feel about Fool for Your Lovin' here in a minute, but I think as far as '87 goes, this version of Crying in the Rain is standout. I really enjoy it. Coming in at number 2, Ready and Willin'. Again, an album that we've talked about a couple of times already. I like this record a lot. I think it's really, to me, it's a sister album of Come and Get It, which I think came in at number 4 for me. Those can really bounce back and forth depending on the day for me. But I think what stands out for me is I think the tracks, there's just a millimeter difference in me liking some of the tracks a little bit better. I think the title track, Ain't Gonna Cry No More, Blind Man, I think is phenomenal. I love the feel of that song. And of course, Fool for Your Lovin', I think it was mentioned earlier, sort of, Accept No Substitutes. I think this is the definitive version of this song. I think Neil Murray is phenomenal. Now, granted, I'm a bass player, and I think you get asked a lot, who are your influences? And I always mention Neil Murray. I think Neil Murray's work on the classic Whitesnake stands up to anything. I mean, as was already mentioned, he's busy but doesn't get in the way. I like the way that his bass is mixed, and you can hear it. It's not buried. His bass lines are phenomenal, highly underrated. I think Neil Murray is when people talk about rock bass players.
Right.
What else? I think what was I doing? Ready and Willin'. Yeah, I think that's it. That's number 2. I think we'll save number 1, but yeah, I think it's a strong record, certainly of the classic lineup. And I will mention, I know what I wanted to mention. I think as we record this, August 24th is the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Bernie Marsden. So probably appropriate that we do this today, and that as we're doing this, we give a little thought to Bernie.
All right. Thank you for mentioning that, David, because I had completely forgotten. Bernie remained a raconteur until the day he died. And if you have not read his autobiography, it is a really entertaining read. Just seemed like a really nice man and a hell of a guitar player. All right, Peter, let's do number 3 and number 2.
Okay, well, my number 3 is Slide It In. So the UK version, not the US version. I like Slide It In because I think this is the transition album where Whitesnake still have that old classic sort of sound. You've got Mel Gully, you've got Mick Moody, Colin Bomber Hodgkinson comes in on bass, and you've got the great late Cozy Powell on drums. the thing I like about it's a different sound to, say, Saints or Sinners and Come and Get It or Ready and Willing, but it's a more stripped back sound. There's more power chords. It's more going towards the meat and potatoes AC/DC sound. And I've got a theory that if Whitesnake retained this sound, they may have had more longevity in their career, in America at least, than being caught up in hair metal. So if they stuck to this image and this Sonics in Slide It In, the UK version, and maybe like it a stretch with the US version when they brought in John Sykes to do the mayonnaise, I think that they may have been a continued drawed card, because unfortunately with 1987, Whitesnake just got caught up in the hair metal. They were classified fairly or unfairly, and then, sort of relegated to that sort of, not sort of the huge arena act that they should have been and maintained for a considerable period of time. Anyway, back to Slide It In. I think it's a great album. The songwriting's really punchy. You start off with Gambler, which has one of the greatest John Lord intros of all time. It has mystery. It's captivating. You listen to it, and then the guitar work comes in, and David Coverdale's vocals are just on form. He's still got that bluesy vocal all the way through. Love Ain't No Stranger. That's probably top 5 Whitesnake. Standing in the Shadow of the Blues, Slow and Easy. I mean, he's bringing his Led Zepp, Cozy's doing his John Bonham, getting it on. But man, what a great song. And David's having a ball of fun. This is a great album. Mel Galley, great songwriter. He puts these beautiful guitar licks, terribly underrated. We don't talk about Mel Galley, but man, if it wasn't for that accident that he had on his arm, he would have been part of the Whitesnake story, but it wasn't meant to be. And, John Sykes was basically the sole guitarist. I think they changed it to the US remix, more so to suit the American market. It's very polished. You've got Sykes doing his little whittle diddles coming in here and there, but it doesn't really add much. If you want to see what Whitesnake is all about and the meat and potatoes and the sonics of an honest band, the UK version is where it's at. So that's Slide It In, and that's my number 3. Going to number 2, it's been discussed before, Whitesnake, Ready and Willing. This is the classic lineup, except no substitute. This is where I think that the band was more realised in respect of their arrangements, their songwriting, their performances. And even Martin Birch, even though his production may have been polite, the songwriting's so strong. The playing's so strong, you don't really need a bells and whistles production. Just has to sit back, have a cup of tea, and let the band play, because the songs are fantastic. Ready and Willing, so much soul. Don't listen to that slip of the tongue version, which absolutely destroys it. Listen to listen to Fool for Your Loving on this album. It's absolutely killer. Ain't Gonna Cry No More. So much soul. There's a lot of soul in this. So there's even a little bit of gospel. There's a little bit of R&B. This is where David Coverdale's vocals, I think, were at the stone cold peak. Around Come and Get It and Ready and Willing, I think vocally he was right at the top of the pyramid. And even from a vocalist point of view, that's what I would recommend, to go to the catalogue. Listen to this, Ready and Willing. This is where David Coverdale's vocals have never been bettered. Carry Your Load, Blind Man. Look, I just think they're all firing. Neil Murray, he's had a few shout-outs. He's such an underrated bass player. And what bass player in their career at Whitesnake adapted their sound? He went into 1987, changed his sonics as a bass player into a heavy metal bass player, and successfully. So he's one of the few bass players that actually changed his sound to suit the times. And yeah, that's a fascinating topic in itself. Anyway, Whitesnake, Ready and Willing. I think that the songwriting, the performances of the band, and David Coverdale are just on fire, and that's my number 2.
Okay. Whitesnake does not have such a huge catalog that we're not going to see some overlap from the panelists. So I'm not surprised to see certain albums reappearing multiple times. But Tim, let's see what you've got for your 3 and 2.
I had it actually written down, talk about Bernie, because yeah, I did notice it was the anniversary of his passing. So I'm glad that we've done that. So real quick, Live in the Heart of the City is still what I would recommend anyone listen to if they want an introduction to pre-slided in Whitesnake. It's the first Whitesnake album I bought after 1987, because by now Geffen had reissued the catalog. I think they reissued the catalog sometime in late 1987. And I bought it because I was looking for Fool for Your Loving. I had caught the old video from 1980 on Much Music, Canada's MTV, loved the song, couldn't find the studio album it was on because there's one studio album that Geffen did not reissue. Anyway, I found Live in the Heart of the City. I said, well, I'll get this. And so these are the versions of these songs, like Walking in the Shadow of the Blues and Take Me With You. These are the versions of these songs that I'm the most used to. But my number 3 is an album I eventually did find. And of course, I have to stay on brand and I have to hold up an 8-track. Ready and Willing. Now, I actually think this is kind of a classy cover, but it's not as entertaining as the other ones. And I will agree that the original Fool for Your Loving is the definitive one. That's the first version I heard. I'm glad that's the first version I heard, because most people my age probably wouldn't have heard that version first, right. But it just so happens I caught that old video. I love Bernie's solo in it. I love Pacey's little fills. They're not your average fills. And yeah, Neil Murray's bass playing. Busy, but always serving the song. I'd heard that song and I'd heard Sweet Talker because they were on Live in the Heart of the City. The rest of the album was new to me, except for the last song, She's a Woman, which I now realized once hearing that Lord took a little bit of that and put it in the live version of Take Me With You, that little triplet part that he does. I'm like, oh, okay. That's actually a pretty good showcase for John Lord in Whitesnake, because She's a Woman. But Ain't Gonna Cry No More, that was a gem. I know that's on the deluxe Live in the Heart of the City, but I was only familiar with the original 7-track version. The title song's fantastic. Yeah, Blind Man, Love Man. It's a really entertaining album. It's kind of cool that Fool for Your Loving from that album kind of kicked the door open a little bit in the States to hit number 53. That's not bad. I think if they were opening for Jethro Tull, I think if they'd been opening for a more similar band,
right?
History could have been a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, being someone that got into the band with 1987, I'm going back and listening. I always went back when I got into bands, but I realized I was kind of listening to 2 or 3 different bands because of all the lineup changes. But yeah, Ready and Willing, there's a good reason that's usually the studio album most people point to. And if I thought it was allowed, I would have picked Live in the Heart of the City for one of mine. Now, my number 2 is going to be controversial. Are you ready? I have to say, nostalgia is everything. Timeline is everything. So given that I got into Whitesnake with the 1987 album, but after it had been out for almost a year, the first Whitesnake album I waited for and bought when it was brand new was Slip of the Tongue.
Not surprising.
There are a lot of reasons, and there are a lot of valid reasons why people don't like this album. I get it. I wish Adrian Vandenberg had played on this. I love Adrian's playing. I'm a huge fan of Vandenberg, the band, the old stuff and the new stuff. I like Steve Vai. Steve Vai is incredible. I think that this was the musical equivalent of what they call stunt casting in movies, which is when you get a big name in just for the marquee draw. Now, that isn't to say I don't like what he played on here, but it's not really Whitesnake. Coverdale also, someone mentioned how he changed his vocal range. I think he ruined his vocal cords by singing in a higher register and singing above his natural range. He could only do it so long. You watch that live at Donington from 1990, it's almost unlistenable because he's literally screaming everything. Everything is right at the top of his range here. That's why when you get to a song on here like Sailing Ships, where he starts out in more of his natural range, it sounds better.
Right.
Having said all of that, I really like this album. I remember buying it new, popping it into the Walkman, and I played this album all the time. I was disappointed that For Fear Loving wasn't the hit single that Here I Go Again was, but I knew even at 15, I was chart savvy enough to know it's just too heavy to become a big pop hit like Here I Go Again was. They really should have picked something. If they were going to redo another Whitesnake song, I think there were better ones they could have done. Someone mentioned Don't Break My Heart Again. Who knows what would have happened if they'd have given that a more modern treatment. I also want to say I like the production on this album better than 1987. I know that's controversial, but I think it's
I agree with you.
It's a rather cleaner production. I mean, the drums sound real. And I think, Tommy Aldridge sounds great on the album, which he usually does. So, yeah, it's my number 2 for a lot of nostalgia, but a lot of reasons that I just think that there are good songs in here, like Wings of the Storm. And I think that it was a major missed opportunity that they didn't redo Burning Heart by Vandenberg, because that's the hit song that this album missed, because it sold a flat 1 million. Yes, it sold 1 million copies, but when your previous album went on to sell 8 million, what was missing? Not one, but 2 great big pop hit singles that had people that never bought albums by bands like Whitesnake buying that album. Slip of the Tongue did not. The Deeper the Love was not the big hit single that, either of those other songs were. But Coverdale, at that point in time, singing Burning Heart, I think that would have been a hit, because it's a fantastic song in its original Vandenberg version, but that's always been my feeling about that. But I understand why they didn't do it, because if Adrian Vandenberg wasn't on it, that's his song. So having said all of that, I stick by it. Slip of the Tongue, my number 2.
Okay. I agree, man. Fight for what you believe in. That's what being a contrarian's all about. Speaking of which, I'm kind of surprised that my number 3 has not shown up more. And I'm going to, spoiler alert, because I chose to do mine in chronological order, this is my favorite Whitesnake album, but it's coming in at number 3 because I'm going on a timeline. But I am talking about Saints and Sinners. Now, maybe people are going to put it in as their number 1s. We'll see if anybody else has this, because it's been omitted so far by everyone else. This album has all of the frequencies I was missing on Ready and Willing. This is the album where all of the sudden, Whitesnake is no longer a blues-based rock band. They are a bluesy hard rock band. If you listen to Ready and Willing, and I'll agree, I love Neil Murray's bass playing, but at least on the versions I have, his bass tone on Ready and Willing is very weak and farty. And that's never the player's fault. That's the engineer's fault. That's how they mic'd him up in the studio. That's how they recorded it. He's mixed way back. You can hear the bass so much better on this album. It is so much more aggressive. It's so much more up-tempo. It opens with the wonderful Young Blood, which is a good in-your-face. It just grabs you. Another one, Bloody Luxuries, another great song. And, of course, it has 2 enduring Whitesnake numbers in Crying in the Rain and Here I Go Again. And I always say you don't really have to choose which is your favorite version of those songs, either that or the 1987, because you can have them both. There's no reason not to enjoy all of them, right? But that said, I like Crying in the Rain much better on the 1987 album, and I like Here I Go Again also better on the 1987 album. I know, controversial, but I think they made that one lyric change. Instead of saying like a hobo, I was born to walk alone. Plus, again, David is still, he has not quite transitioned into his pseudo heavy metal singing yet. He's still very much a blues singer, but less of a soul singer. I think there's a lot more soul stylings on Ready and Willin' in Come and Get It than there is on Saints and Sinners. I think this is just much more a straight up in your face hard rock album, and it's my favorite. Plus, Whitesnake are one of the few bands that puts the title track as the last track on the album. Just don't see that very often. And Saints and Sinners is a great track. So, yeah. Besides, this is the album that I think is actually closest stylistically to something like Burn from David's Deep Purple days. Just my opinion, take that for what it's worth. Moving forward in the timeline, I'm going to the 1987 album. Of course, it wasn't really called 1987, it's just called Whitesnake. Or in Japan, I think they actually called it Serpent's Album. That's what it says on their logo, which I have trouble reading. But yeah, I make no apologies for it. I was not a Whitesnake listener in 1987. I was a committed thrash metal fan. And the first time I was walking across campus and through somebody's room, I heard Maroon Banana. I was like, whoa, what the hell is that? It is an attention getter, which that's the thing about the wind-up. It is an attention getter. Now, if he did it less, it would have more impact. But there is great playing all over this album. Some of it, there's some filler. There are probably 4 songs I love and 4 songs that I tolerate on the album, but it is exactly what 1987 needed. And for some reason, now I'm not an expert. Well, I'm not an expert in many things, but one of the things in which I am not an expert is the music from England in 1987. But England kind of seemed to just take a step back from hard rock during the whole US hair metal era, as we think of it. But that year, Deep Purple released House of the Blue Light, and Def Leppard released Hysteria, and then Whitesnake released 1987. And of those 3 albums, I think 1987 is easily the best album. It's the most muscular. It's got the best riffs. It's got the best playing. And the sound that this album has, now, admittedly, it's uber 80s. It's massively overproduced. It's got the gated drums. It's got a detune effect on the guitar. And so wide, if you, this may not mean anything to people, but I'm going to say it anyway. So if you take the note A is 440 hertz.
Hertz, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a detune will take it from 420 hertz to 460 hertz. So now instead of occupying one frequency space, it's this huge frequency space. In fact, Coverdale complained about it endlessly because he's like, that's where my vocals are supposed to go. Where am I supposed to sing now? Because you're covering it all up with guitar. And too much reverb. But all of that sounds amazing on the rhythm parts. It kills the lead parts, especially when Sykes is playing fast, and he's a wicked fast player. Sykes is just as fast as Yngwie Malmsteen. But you can't hear those notes. There's so much reverb. There's so much wash on them. It just becomes this mush. But it sounds amazing for the rhythms. And I just love that. There's a reason that this album was enduringly popular. And I have no problem picking it as one of my top 5. All right. Oh, and no, I'll do that next. Let's go around and do people's number 1 pick. So, Peter Jones, what's number 1?
Okay. Well, this is me trying to be as concise as possible because I've got about 1,000 tangents in my head because I have a very strong emotional feeling to where we are here at number 1. There's a whole lot of stuff that happened and they still impact me today. I will say, I think I'm the only one of our crew who will not pick anything past this record, and I didn't. So mine is Slide It In, and I echo my fellow Peter. It's UK only for me. The US one for me is unlistenable. And if that's contrarian, it's contrarian, but it's true to me. I don't want to turn this into a beat up on John Sykes, but I don't care for him whatsoever. So there's not anything past this album from Whitesnake that I listen to. Nothing. And it's not unlike my Beatles. I go up to 66. I appreciate the Beatles past 66, but my era is up through 66. So what do we got going on here? The band, to me, is just exceptionally special. The tracks are unbelievable. The Martin production on this is just spectacular and glorious. Cozy's drums are so huge, partly because of who he is, how Martin recorded them, but also because there's not a lot of extra sonics garbling up the sonic spectrum, which is what Reed was talking about with the detuning. It's cleaner. There's more room. The instruments sit more appropriately in the sonic spectrum, so therefore nobody's being covered up by a bunch of rooms. And for me, as a lover of Cozy and a drummer, oh my goodness, I'm in absolute heaven. You've talked about the tracks. You've talked about them. To me, the real powerhouse on here is All or Nothing, which I just think is just a sledgehammer. And it's still plenty heavy enough. It still has some blues elements. Slow and Easy is grimy. It's just fun. It's just kind of, and a lot of other things, like I said. What else do we have here? It's the last time they used the snake logo. They stopped using it. I think that's a mistake. I think it is a marketing thing that should have stayed with them. I also look at it this way. And yes, the album, following was massive. There's no question about it. But I've often used this quote, and I do think that it has some application. Success can often be an impediment to creativity. And when I say that, is that when you become, your motives change. And I know everybody wants to make money. Please don't, in the comments, you don't want to make money. Yes, but I'm the listener. I'm not the artist. The artist wants to make money. I'm the listener, and I want to hear the best version of the band I can. Aerosmith is a perfect example for me. And Joe Perry has said it, you sell your soul to write hits. And when everybody my age was waiting for Rocks 2, which we were never going to get, was because that's not what they were doing. So success can be good and success cannot be good, but it can be an impediment to creativity. And the other thing is, moving past this period, once Doug came into the picture, I was upset because I preferred that Doug stay with Dio. I loved Killing the Dragon, and I wanted Doug to stay with him so he could have that guitarist the rest of his career, and it didn't work out that way. And so I had some hard feelings. Obviously I'm over him. I'm a big boy. But I liked Killing the Dragon, and I wanted that lineup to stay together. It's an interesting thing. And I draw my line. I'm an old school guy. All my records are up through 84. I don't begrudge anybody who likes anything past it. Love it. I'm super happy that there's more stuff out there for other people to enjoy. But for me, my journey ends in 1984, and my Whitesnake story ends right there. So.
Okay, well, it's
dead silence. I've stunned everybody.
Yeah, just had to unmute there. It's your journey, man. End it wherever you want. Okay, so David, what is your final selection, sir?
All right, I'm going to just sort of reiterate, I think, what came before. Slide it in. I think that I won't, belabor the point, but I think for all the reasons that Peter mentioned, it means Slide It In is such a fantastic album and comes in at number one for me. And as I mentioned, really any of my top three at any point in time, or top four really could slide up, no pun intended, into the number one slot, right? There was a long long period where the 87 album was. And there are days when I'll tell you the Ready and Willing album is, my number one. I think the thing about Slide It In, I mean, it's obviously my entry point is the US version. That's what I became accustomed to. Right. But it was super cool that, as they released the anniversary editions and now on CD and vinyl, we can have both versions. And so for me, it's super cool to be able to have both versions. Well, I like John Sykes and I absolutely love Neil Murray, and certainly Cozy Powell. Even though the UK edition wasn't my first listen, over time I gravitate back toward that, even though it doesn't have Neil Murray. So I've always got a pull to where Neil Murray is, because I feel like by picking the UK version, I'm picking against Neil Murray, and that hurts a little bit. And I don't like to do that. But, if it, just going, today, at this point in time, if I'm going to put Slide It In on the record player, it's usually the UK version. And I'm grateful that we have both versions. And I think it's cool that we have that. Like we have somebody who came from outer space and wanted to know about Whitesnake. You could play Slide It In, the two versions of the same record, and get a feel for UK Whitesnake and maybe US polished Whitesnake. And say, it's not just different. It's not different material. It's the same material, but kind of here's what Whitesnake is, in the US later, and here's sort of a taste of what they were, so it's this bridge album, it's this transition, and it's cool. We have, I don't know if there's another example out there of a band where we've got the same album with, really two different.
Eternal Idol, Black Sabbath. You can get
there you
both
go.
Ray Gillen and Tony Martin.
Which is cool there's a good example. So it's cool to have that. So that's why Slide It In sort of becomes my number one. I think the songs, they don't tire. Gambler, Standing in the Shadow, Love No Ain't No Stranger, All or Nothing was just mentioned, Guilty of Love are my favorites. But the album doesn't tire on me, and I think that's one of the reasons why today, as I sit here, I'm picking Slide It In. Obviously, it's got Mel Galley all over it, which is, interesting. Had he not been really a big part of Whitesnake to that point. But, what a phenomenal record. So my number one, Slide It In.
Excellent.
Okay. Peter Kerr, what is your last pick, sir?
All right, I'm going to bring home the bacon with Whitesnake. Come and get it. This was my entry point into Whitesnake. So I just remember when I was a teenager, went to a record store. I used to, pick albums just by the album cover. And I went to W&U and I had Uriah Heep, Innocent Victim, which, if you know that album, it's got a snake and you can see down the throat of the snake. And then I had, on my other hand, I had this album, Whitesnake, where you have a snake and an apple. So I went, which one should I go for? Why I went for Whitesnake is because David Coverdale, because I knew Burn, I knew Deepest Purple, and I gravitated to that. And the rest is history. That's why I've become a Whitesnake tragic. It's my entry point to this album because it is the essential Whitesnake. I love the bluesy Whitesnake. You've got the wonderful tonality of Bernie Marsden. You've got Mick Moody with that great slide guitar. You've got Neil Murray with that bass. And you've got John Lord playing, with Hammond, the colour. And Ian Pace, I agree with Peter Jones. I've listened to this album, 500 times. I wore out my copy. And I love the little subtle fills that Ian Pace does. Like even a song like Till the Day I Die. I used to turn the outro up and hearing his little fills right at the end. I probably got permanent ear damage on my headphones just listening to it. But there's everything about this album I just love. Don't Break My Heart Again. I think that is the quintessential version. It's very soulful. It's very bluesy. Wine, Women and Song. Child of Babylon is a real stonker of a song. Would I Lie to You, Girl? There's a lot of, we don't talk about David's sort of charisma, but he is so cheeky. He is so charismatic on this album. And you get his personality in spades. And you compare him when he was in the California Jam, where he was very uncomfortable and he was swatting. There were flies and he had $1 million check in his back pocket and he didn't look like the superstar. But by, fast forward to 1981, you've got the confident David Coverdale and the personality in spades. And that really comes through the speakers. You can hear it. This album went to number 2 in the UK charts. It was a huge hit. It was pushed. It didn't quite make number 1 because there was a little known band called Adam and the Ants. Do you remember them, guys? Adam and the Ants? Anyway, this would have been their first number 1 UK album. They were huge. I really think if it got the record company push into America, they could have gone down that ZZ Top sort of route and been superstars, but it wasn't meant to be. So I think this is the album for me where it encapsulates the bluesy, beautiful tones of David Coverdale, the wonderful playing of this classic band. The songwriting is just top-notch. And for me, the entry point is my number 1, and that is Come and Get It. And I agree with Peter Jones. It's got the best album cover. Looking at you.
Okay.
I'm scarred now.
Come and Get It. All right. Thank you, Peter, very much. Tim, what is your final selection, sir?
I love the fact that we have differences, but we have similarities, but our similarities are often for different reasons. My number 1 Slide It In.
Yeah.
And, again, call it the timeline. I'm used to the North American version. That's the one that was available. There was no, I didn't have access to import, so I just got the Geffen version, and I'm used to the songs in that order. When I did get the 25th anniversary edition, which has, I think it's got the version I have anyway, it's got the complete UK version and then some of the North American tracks. And I think I got it. I was heading to work, so I popped it in the car, and I was like, oh, it starts with Gambler. Like, I'm used to it starting with Slide It In. So that was a thing to get my head around. But either way, I think we can agree they're great songs. Love Ain't No Stranger, my favorite Whitesnake song ever. To me, that's peak songwriting. Like, if I could write songs and be in a band, I'd want to do songs like that for my slower songs because it still has a pulse to it. But what I like about when, Coverdale's got his different personas. He's got his his naughty persona, he's got his super confident persona, but when he's bearing his soul, when he's heartbroken, there's a sincerity there that doesn't come out in a lot of, the power ballads from the era. I wouldn't exactly call Love Ain't No Stranger a power ballad. It's more like a fast ballad. I don't know what you'd call it, mid-tempo. I have no idea. I think the thing rocks in places, but, his lyrics, who knows where the cold wind blows, and you've got crowds of people singing those songs. They're very heartfelt. And I think that comes through. Slow and Easy is a classic. I absolutely love Guilty of Love. That is just ear candy. That is it's so repetitive, but it's so catchy. Like Give Me More Time. It's a fantastic album. I love the fact that I think it was already a platinum album, say by 85 in the States. But I think a lot of people went back after the 1987 album, and I think it's at double platinum at least now. I didn't check that one when I was looking, but a lot of people heard this album, and deservedly so. It is fantastic. It is a good bridge between the main 2 eras of Whitesnake, and I just think it's full of great songs. And no matter which version you get a hold of, you're going to hear those great songs. You're just going to hear slightly different mixes to them. I don't hear a lot of John Sykes on this. I really don't. I seeing the videos before I got into the albums and before I really knew much about the band, I have to go at face value. That's who I'm seeing. That must be who I'm hearing. But little by little, I realized, no, that's not the case. They don't sound anything like that when they play. That's why the 1987 album, when you hear those live versions that are on the deluxe version, they don't sound right because it's not the same musicians at all.
Right.
Anyway, my number 1.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much. All right, I'm going to try and do my last piece here as rapidly as I can. This album has already been mentioned, but I am going all the way to the modern era for Forevermore. I am a massive Doug Aldrich fan. I'm talking, I've got Lion, Burning Rain, the House of Lords album, Sahara, which he played mostly uncredited on. I love Doug Aldrich. And also Dead Daisies, the stuff he played on with Dio. He's a very adaptable guitarist. In his younger days, if you listen to Burning Rain, it's much more something in the line of like a Van Halen style. He's very flash. It's blues based, but he's playing all over the neck very quickly. When he moves into Whitesnake, he's come from Dio into Whitesnake. Kind of a weird thing that, you know, the exact same guitar players, because Vivian Campbell also did the same thing. Why do guitar players work in both those bands that are so radically different? I don't know. But the rumor at the time was that Coverdale wanted Sykes back. I have never credited that rumor. That split was so acrimonious. But Doug Aldrich has said in interviews that he's like, me and Sykes, that's not going to work together. We're the same type of guitar player. You don't need two. And Coverdale told him, I don't want Sykes. I want you. And I think Aldrich was exactly the right songwriting partner. So the first thing they did was a live album. I had to look up the live album, Live in the Shadow of the Blues. And Doug told him, I'm not going to be in your band unless we do original music. So they released 5 new songs, and that was so well received that then they did Good to Be Bad and went on to do Forevermore. And I think, as has already been mentioned, this, well, and not quite this way, I think this is Coverdale's last great vocal performance. I don't think he sounds as good on Flesh and Blood. He certainly does not sound as good on the Purple album. And no shade, the man's getting older. We all deteriorate as we get older. But he and Doug were writing things to suit his voice, which that is a skill that you cannot overlook in a writer. So David is just singing at a very comfortable range. He does a few high notes, but he's not screaming at the top of his lungs. Doug and Reb Beach is a great foil for Doug Aldrich. Doug is much more of a Jimmy Page meets Eddie Van Halen, and Reb is Richie Blackmore meets Eddie Van Halen. And it's kind of funny. Doug Aldrich is like, man, this was my band, and I really gave Reb no rope at all. And you know, Reb's a hell of a player. And yet, by the time they get to Forevermore, they had worked it out. And I think it's actually Reb Beach that you hear first on the album. Anytime you hear tapping licks, that's Reb. But the two of them together were just a marvelous team. And they brought in these very modern sounding wall of sound guitars. And I think the best way I can put it is it's like the production on 1987 if you took off all of the excess reverb and the detuning. So you get this massive wall of electric guitars right in your face, but it's not this sonic wash that you can't make anything out. You can hear every little detail of what the players are doing. David is singing great. Like I said, I very much agree with David. I think Forevermore is classic Whitesnake. If you listen to I Want You, Shine a Light, Coverdale, the only adjective I can use is he sounds exuberant. He is clearly loving it. He's in a good place. He's with people he likes. He's making music he likes. And I just think it's a wonderful album. If people have not checked out Flesh and Blood and Forever, or not Flesh and Blood, Good to Be Bad and Forevermore, give those a listen. Not that I have anything against Flesh and Blood. Actually, I do. It's too long. They should have cut 3 tracks off of that CD. But that's just the, that's the curse of the CD age. People say, we have 72 minutes. We're going to fill it up. Well, they could have edited that down a little bit. But Forevermore is the last of the, for my money, the last of the great David Coverdale vocal performances. And I just think he and Doug Aldrich were a magical partnership. And I don't want to take anything away from Reb Beach, but again, it was really Doug calling the shots. I did get to see that lineup live. As far as they played this little festival in the DFW area. It was the only show they played in America that year. I have no idea why they were there. It was free. They just showed up, and I was like, it's Whitesnake? And yeah, they got up and did a headlining set. I was like, okay, awesome. Well, that was worth the price of admission. Okay, and we did have one panelist who could not make it at the last second. He asked me to supply his top 5, and they were number 5, Ready and Willing. Number 4, Come and Get It. Number 3, Live in the Heart of the City. I am seeing a lot of repeats here. Number 2, Whitesnake, the 1987 album, and what is clearly the winner as the number 1 among contrarians, Slide It In. All right, and if we had more time, I would go around and make each of you explain why Saints and Sinners isn't on your list. But we don't have that much time, so we're just going to go around very quickly. If you've got honorable mentions, just blaze through them. Give us any last thoughts, and we'll wrap this thing up. Pete?
Well, I think it's the real winner here are the fans, because there's such a wide range of material here that you can pick and choose your eras. That's what we all do. We like what we like. We move on from what we don't. And so when you've got a discography that's that expansive, go for it. Pick what works for you. Pick some early, pick some mid, pick some late, whatever. Mix and match, do whatever you want, and enjoy, a very talented group of musicians, that have made a really strong impact in their field. And, we're certainly way better off with them being around than not around. So, I would say from that, kudos to the snake. So.
All right. Kudos to the snake. There we go. Let's put that up as the thumbnail. David Alpizar, any last minute wrap up?
Yeah, real quick. I'll just say, since I'm wearing the t-shirt, honorable mention to Love Hunter. It's a great record for reasons that were already mentioned. Just didn't quite squeeze into my top 5. And I'd also like to tip of the hat to Tim for giving Slip of the Tongue a little bit of love. It's in my timeline too, but it's a tough one, obviously, because it doesn't really have Whitesnake DNA. As Tim mentioned, I like Vi, I like Whitesnake, I like them separate. But there is some really good stuff on there. Tim mentioned Wings of the Storm, and I think Sailing Ships is a really classic Whitesnake song. So worth a listen. But anyway, hats off to Tim for mentioning it. So I think I agree. We're the real winner of the fans. This catalog is phenomenal. I don't think there's a wrong direction to go with it.
Okay. Very good. Peter Kerr, last minute thoughts?
Look, I didn't include this in the top 5. I would have if I was going to include live albums. I've gazumped you, read. But look, Live in the Heart of the City is a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite live albums of all time. I love it. I'd just say, folks, just sample the Whitesnake catalog. My honorable mention is the catalog. Just discover it. I would say avoid the Purple album. I can't stand that album. Listen to the original Purple versions. Don't go the Whitesnake amped up versions. But everything else, just go in, discover, enjoy.
All right, Tim?
Peter knows I love the Purple album. I love the originals too, but anyway, that's another story. I had a hard time leaving this out of my top 5. I love this album. Youngblood, rocks, there you go.
Okay. And I will say, I had heard, I love this story. David Coverdale repeats it all the time, says he picked Steve Vai because of the movie Crossroads, which I think is hilarious because Vai doesn't play the bluesy stuff in the movie. That's Ry Cooder.
That's Ry Cooder.
Yeah. He wanted the devil's guitar player.
Yeah. Anyway.
Maybe Ry Cooder should have been in Whitesnake.
Yeah. Yes. That actually would have been a very interesting choice. He certainly plays slide guitar. He would have been a good replacement for Mick Moody. All right, I do have an honorable mention. I've always had a soft spot for Restless Heart. It was supposed to be a Coverdale solo album. It was branded as Whitesnake, kind of like Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi. It was Whitesnake and David Coverdale, I think, is how it's billed. I forget the exact wording on the front of the album, but it's a little mellower. It's not super hard rock like the others, but it's something different. And you can't eat pizza every meal, right? You gotta split things up a little bit once in a while, try some variety. And again, you don't have to be a partisan for one era or the other. All this music is readily available. enjoy all of it. Or just pick one album and go on the comments and tell us we're idiots for liking the others. It's all good. I never read the comments anyway. But thank you so much for joining us for this video. The Contrarians do appreciate you commenting and watching the videos. They absolutely do. There's a Patreon you can check out if you're interested in being in these panels. We just love turning you on to new music. We love discussing music, and I hope that you have found this panel entertaining. We'll see you again real soon. Thanks, guys.
See you later. Bye.
Cheers.